Hi, my name is Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the, well, frankly, reprehensible way in which the media, including the BBC, and for the purposes of this, most especially the BBC, were reporting unlawful activities on VE Day recently in a way that seems to deliberately encourage the sort of narrative that the lockdown is ending, even though the government have not said that it is. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, first thing to note is that this evening the government are going to be making an announcement. It is not at all believed that they are going to be significantly easing restrictions on the lockdown, if indeed they ease them at all. But what we've been having is the papers saying that the lockdown was going to be scaled right back. The government have not gone along with that, but they, at the same time, they haven't torn those papers down. They haven't been saying, can you not be listening to what you're reading in the newspapers? It's not valid. They haven't been attacking these reports. And the papers are openly saying that even the pubs are going to be open again imminently. Pubs, for goodness sake. And as such, and in the absence of government refutations, restricted businesses are already starting to open again. Neither government nor the police seem to be doing much about this, and certainly nothing in my area. And to allow this narrative to unfold was particularly dangerous at a bank holiday weekend. And it was what's happened. Even out and about, when I've been out and about on my walk during VE Day on the Friday, it's yesterday from my point of view, 2 days ago from your point of view when you're watching this, there were a few like neighbourhoods that we walked through having little mini tea parties where it was clearly multiple households quite close together, but it wasn't widely seen. You didn't see these scenes widely. In fact, what was more common as we went around is people having individual little VE tea parties in their own gardens, maybe talking to neighbours, but some separated by their own gardens, but not lent up on the garden wall or anything. So most people seem to be quite sensible about it. There were just a few that were not. But if you look at some of the scenes on the BBC, then they were going out where you had whole streets out and milling together. Now, just extrapolating from my own local experience, I can't imagine that they could just send out a roving reporter to find a street that was absolutely jam-packed. So I'm getting the impression that they wanted to present this somehow. For some reason, they wanted to present this to the nation as a typical street having a tea party. And they'd have given some warning. So just being there and doing a report on a particular street where they'd have known that there was something going on would only encourage even more people to come in on it. And because you're broadcasting these scenes around the nation, you're normalising the behaviour. So there's people who are looking at what the papers are saying the lockdown. Oh, they're saying they're going to be scaling the lockdown right back. The lockdown's over. In fact, the papers are now saying that the lockdown is, to all intents and purposes, over. There might be the odd little lingering thread of it remaining, but it is basic. The vast majority of the restrictions are basically over, which is not true at all. And I've no doubt will still not be true tomorrow when the government have had their little say tonight. But if you're someone who's just reading the papers, I mean, you don't watch the press conference from the government. Most people don't do that. So you just read the papers. Well, the papers are saying they're going to be scaling it right back. And these are papers that are Tory papers. They have a very close relationship with government ministers. And then you see on the BBC scenes of people out and about and really close together, and you think, oh, the lockdown's basically over. And then you start to think, well, obviously the science is saying, because the government keeps saying they're following the science is saying that we're actually all fine now, we've done it. And so you're normalising the behaviour. So lots of people who might have stayed in because, we're not supposed to. It's like, oh, well, I mean, they're broadcasting that on the news and the police aren't having a moan about it. So actually we are allowed now, aren't we? And that's what seems to be happening. And, and what I was talking about in a video a couple of days ago was the fact that this to me showed that the government had lost control. Completely lost control of the situation. Because in the vacuum of them saying anything, the newspapers have filled it with their rubbish, and that is now controlling the narrative. And it makes no difference what the government announced tonight. It makes no difference to me, because the people are not. If the government say basically the lockdown is still in place, we might tweak it a little bit, but it's basically still in place until June, then people will be going, well, hang on, no, we can't be arsed with it anymore because the papers said this. They've got it into the reds now. And then, but that's one way of looking at it. There is another way of looking at it. There is a way of looking at it that the government may be doing this deliberately. And the reason why I thought it was much, and still think it's much more likely that this is just government incompetence rather than malice, is because of the old adage, never ascribe to malice that which may be explained by incompetence. But there is a malicious possibility as well. So here's the scenario. The government are a conservative government. In fact, it's a very right-wing conservative government, even as conservative governments go. This is particularly right-wing. Basically libertarian, I think is what you call them in America. These are people, Boris Johnson is definitely of this ilk, but a number of them as well, are of the mind, genuine belief that the state should not play a part in people's lives. It exists so that basically the state needs to be just about big enough that you can have a sense of flag-waving patriotism in a land, but no more than that. The state mustn't get involved in people's lives. So the lockdown for them is going against their political beliefs. They hate it. But at the same time, they know they had to do it, but they were forced into it as well. They didn't want to. So you imagine this line of thinking. We brief the Tory newspapers that we're ending the lockdown. They publish this readily because they are not in favour of the lockdown either. Get people into the mind of the lockdown not being in place. But we don't want to be blamed for this second spike that will inevitably ensue as a result of it. So what we do is we wash our hands of it. We don't announce an end to the lockdown, but people will just behave as if, the lockdown has gone, because we are not, really hammering home the point that people need to obey these rules. And so we're effectively still pursuing the herd immunity strategy. But then later on, when people say, this happened because of, the lockdown wasn't really enforced, we'll be able to say, well, we didn't stop the lockdown. We carried on with it. I'm afraid you'll find it's just people who didn't follow the rules, blame them instead. And so they'll do what Tories always do and turn society against each other, except instead of left against right this time, or anti-EU against pro-EU, they'll just be turning the people who obeyed the lockdown against the people who didn't. Divide and rule, they call it, aren't they? And so that is another possibility. It's not, it would fit, it would be plausible. I'm not saying it is the case, it's just another way of looking at it. And if that is the case, then that is particularly dangerous, and it is an indicator that they have never abandoned this notion of their natural herd immunity strategy, which, remember, is based on the notion of sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives in order that we don't hit our economy too hard. Except, of course, there's no evidence that we won't be hitting our economy even with that strategy. Boris Johnson himself has been advised and has said himself that if we get a second spike, that can actually do more harm to the economy than just staying in lockdown for a bit longer. And in actual fact, if we do get a second spike, then they'll have to seriously lock up. Because remember, our lockdown, if you talk about our lockdown to people in Spain or Italy, for example, they don't recognise it as a lockdown. Ours wasn't anywhere near as tight a lockdown as theirs. So, and we could end up having to go into a harsher lockdown than we ever did, and for a longer period of time if we're not careful. So, that's the other side of it. As far as I can see, you could put this down to either incompetence, which I did a couple of days ago, and I still think is more likely, or you could put it down to deliberate malice and playing the press in that particular way, in which case, well, it's also still an example of incompetence because it's a bloody stupid thing to do. What if the government have done this deliberately in order to be blamed, in order to avoid being blamed for the situation, a situation that they actually want, in pursuit of that herd immunity? That is the other way of looking at it. But there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.